Jenni Hart is an independent writer and copy editor living in Raleigh, North Carolina. Lifestyle magazines have published her profiles, essays, and human interest stories, and she has ghostwritten for national trade and special interest publications. In addition to writing for magazines, Jenni creates content for small business clients and provides developmental editing and copy editing services for fiction and children's writers. Ladies and gentlemen, Jenni Hart.
Thank you, Don. If you all don't mind, I'm just going to hold this. It kept falling off my ear. So today, I'm going to be sharing some tips and strategies for writing in addition to publication. So you've probably attended some sessions today where publishing was really the main focus. And while I've written for about 10 years as a freelance writer, I've also been able to find additional work, which is great especially if you're primarily writing for local markets. We tend to be an incestuous crowd, and there's just so much you can do in a small geographical area, so it's great to develop other avenues for making money. I want to start sort of chronologically. So these are some things that you might want to consider in the beginning if you haven't done this type of freelance writing before. There's a process when you start that I would recommend, the discovery process. I think it will help you sort of determine what your own individual strengths and challenges are, what your personality traits are, and that can point you in a particular direction and help you find markets that fit your personality and your preferences. So this is just an overview, and then we'll break down the segments a little bit further. So discovery, we'll look at ways to find work. And because a lot of this writing is focused on marketing and business and working with small businesses, we'll talk about finding products and finding markets. So it's a very different kind of, really a different kind of vocabulary than what you may be used to as a freelance writer who publishes exclusively. We'll define products, we'll define services, we'll look at your process. So if you're an individual freelance writer, you want to have a process that makes sense for you. You're basically running a business. We'll talk a little bit about setting rates, and we'll look at ways to grow your business. And finally, I'd like to touch on basic needs if you're just getting started, equipment, and some resources that you may find helpful. Okay, the discovery process. I feel it's important to understand your personality before you pursue particular types of markets. Are you the ideas person? I kind of brag that I am the ideas person, not always great on the follow-through, but when we meet for an editorial meeting at the magazine, I come with ideas, and I read a lot, I'm online a lot, I'm involved in a lot of conversations, and I pick things up along the way. I don't know if this is in the way. So I'm an ideas person. You may be a detail person. You may be the person who really loves to fill out Excel spreadsheets. And believe it or not, there are writing opportunities for both. Thanks, Mark. That was right in my line of vision. There are markets for both kinds of people. Ideally, you'll be at least a little bit of both, but it's good to know that about yourself. And I'll discuss why a little bit later on. Are you a generalist or a specialist? Do you know a little bit about everything, or are you interested in focusing in one area? maybe medical writing is something that you'd like to specialize in, or education, or business. So it's good to know what your preference is. Are you an extrovert or an introvert? I have a lot of friends who are writers. Very few of them are extroverts. So it's good to understand that about yourself before you pursue work, because some of the types of markets that you may pursue really require you to be more extroverted than you may feel comfortable with. This is going to determine how you connect with clients, and it will also point you in certain directions when it comes to where you will develop, how you will develop as a writer, how you will improve, and how you'll find support. An example might be if you're very introverted, it may be hard for you to have a support group. It may determine whether you join a writers group or if you stay online and have your little communities where you don't have to be face-to-face. And I think you can do either. And you want to be comfortable, right, doing what you're doing. So it's just good to know. In addition to strengths, I think it's important to ask yourself where you want to focus. Do you want to be a subject matter expert? People who work in corporate positions call them SMEs. Or do you want to be focused on your product or your service? Just an example of that, if you're a subject matter expert, perhaps you studied law, got your law degree. You could focus exclusively on writing for attorneys or specializing in legislation or policies. On the other hand, maybe you're very good at writing for websites, and then you would consider yourself more a product specialist. So there are all different angles and different avenues to pursue. As far as finding work, the types of money-making opportunities that I'm going to talk about include looking at small businesses. In addition to small businesses, which I think of as more the people who are selling the products or possibly making or manufacturing the products. But there are also other businesses. They operate basically like small businesses, and they have the same number of employees as other small businesses, but they're very specialized, and the people who own them or operate them have specialized training. So those would include medical offices, dental, legal, financial, financial advisors. In addition to those, there's work to be found with educational institutions. I've taught classes with Wake Tech, a freelance writing class, and business writing classes. So there's work to be had there. There are some government jobs that you can freelance write for. Also organizations. Look at some of the organizations locally that meet. You can find those through the meetups. There are professional organizations, lots of nonprofits, and sometimes they will have grant money or budget to cover freelance writing work. So, for example, there may be a nonprofit that has received funding to have some sort of educational material produced and distributed throughout the state, for example. So you could, here's one we just got in the mail maybe a week ago. This is, my kids and husband volunteered for this organization probably 3 summers ago, and we continue to get their flyers. And this is, so my kids went and picked cantaloupes and fruit and vegetables out of farms that had already been picked over, but there were still edible things left on the vines. And this organization goes through and they reduce food waste by going out and culling. I think it's called culling, gleaning. That's probably, yeah, I think that's right. So 3 years later, we're still getting their publications. So there's money there. This is coming from a nonprofit organization, but they obviously have I think it's in South Carolina. They still have funding to produce these, nice brochures. I mean, it's 4 pages of content, and they mailed 3 copies to our home. So there's money there. You can write for nonprofit organizations. I do want to give you a tip, a hot tip. As soon as someone finds out that you're a freelance writer and that you work on websites or you can write newsletters or blog posts for them, if it's a nonprofit and they're working on a shoestring budget, which many of them do, they're going to want to pull you in and have you work for them and volunteer for them, and you're going to be doing a lot of writing with no pay. So that's something that a lot of freelancers encounter. One tip that I'd like to share with you all is, because I want to give back to the community and I want to help all these wonderful causes, it's overwhelming how many great nonprofits there are. At any given time, I volunteer for one organization. For the North Raleigh Ministries, I don't know if any of you are familiar with them. A few years ago, they were running on a website that just looked like it had been cobbled together in a preschool class. Nothing against preschoolers, but I've had preschoolers, and their website was a mess. So I just went in and I volunteered with their marketing committee, and I probably volunteered for about a year and a half and kind of got some brochures together for them, and we talked about strategy. But I devoted my nonprofit volunteer work to that one organization. And that way you're able to really focus and not spread yourself too thin. I've also volunteered with Girls Rock, North Carolina Girls Rock organization, and helped them with some fundraising and poster design, which was fun. But I do one at a time, and that way I'm able to say, this is how I operate, and I would love to help you at some point in the future, but I'm working on this particular project with this organization, and I'd be glad to reconnect with you at some point in the future. In addition to the places that you can find money-making opportunities, there are also ways to connect that are a little bit more indirect. So networking, joining TAF is a great place to start. I know that I've shared job opportunities with other TAF members. I've had other TAF members send work my way when their plate was too full. Memberships, believe it or not, LinkedIn, my daughter's in college, and one of her professors here at NC State just recommended that all the kids in the class start a LinkedIn profile. She said, "Mom, what is that?" I'm like, well, it's a little different from Instagram and Snapchat. Let's talk over spring break and I'll set you up. But believe it or not, I've been contacted through LinkedIn, and it's turned into a few small jobs for me. So definitely recommend that. And then meetups, as I mentioned earlier, recommendations. And this one's big. Make sure that your friends and family and people that you know in various communities and in your neighborhood, make sure they know what you do. And not just freelance writer. And definitely don't tell them you work in don't tell them you're a content strategist or you work in integrated marketing. No. Tell them you create brochures or you help write the content for websites. that way, they might make a mental connection. Oh, I have a friend or a neighbor. My daughter can help you with that brochure or that blog post. Make it in the language that's more commonly used. And always reciprocate referrals. I have a particular one that I wanted to mention. I have a friend I met through the magazine who's a wonderful photographer. And there have been a couple of jobs where we've had a story assignment, and I've written the article, and he just ended up being the photographer. It's nothing that we planned in advance. But now that we know each other, we're referring clients to one another. So I'm confident referring clients to him if they need stock photography or headshots, rather, or business profile type photography. It's good to have those connections because sometimes you're just not able to cover it all. So this is the part that I want to call qualifying your potential market. So you know where this work is, but this is how you find out whether you can get paid or not. And this is it's not always the case, but this is a good indication. Sure. That this sort of qualifies your client as being someone that you might be able to actually work with. What kind of business or firm is it? Are you working with an antique button collector who has a little corner shop? Or is this an intellectual property attorney? Think about the margin and what you're going to be able to charge for your services. So what kind of business is it? What kind of profit margin do you think they're working with? Do they have a widespread general appeal, or is it a niche market? You want to go for the general appeal. Is it a brick and mortar operation? What kind of real estate are we talking about? And what's their history and reputation in the community? And that can all be found online. Look for the reviews, check the Better Business Bureau. You may have a contact through LinkedIn or a personal referral, but you want to do a little investigating before you decide to go in and meet and spend your time to find out what kind of writing they need. Do they advertise? All the magazines that were represented here through editors, and there are many others in the area, just grab one every once in a while and flip through. If it's a monthly or a bi-monthly publication, start with the first few pages and flip through. And if you see a business or a firm that's purchased an entire page of advertising for a publication that's in the stands and getting mailed out every month or two, they have money to spend on advertising, and they appreciate that sort of marketing focus. So look for advertising, the quality and the frequency. Also, are they doing content marketing? And I'll show you an example of, I think Sue mentioned the pay-for-play arrangement. It's also called advertorial. Believe it or not, there's work to be found there if you're a freelancer, and I'll show you how. And then look at their demonstrated willingness to invest in services like freelance writing. Are they currently working with a public relations firm? Do they already have marketing or branding or advertising agencies that they work with? How about design or graphic design? Or have they collaborated with a design studio on their branding, their logo, their colors? And do they work with an employee development or training firm? Now, say you're considering contacting a small business and pitching them some of your skills and products. How do you know if they have employed a PR firm or an advertising agency? You're doing it backwards if you're looking from the business to the firm. Start with an advertising firm. Start with a public relations firm. Google PR firms Raleigh or PR firms Triangle Region and look at their client list. If they've paid a PR firm to represent them or to work on branding or marketing, chances are they appreciate the value of that kind of content. And hopefully they'll be more willing to part with their dollars and bring in a freelancer. So start with a graphic design firm. A company who appreciates good marketing and a nice logo and a slug line to their services, they're going to appreciate what you can do for them, and they'll be willing to pay for it. Real quick note on that final bullet, an employee development or training firm. This is not necessarily, I'm not necessarily talking about certification or required employee training, but say the company that you work for is willing to pay for you to go to do some sort of professional development class, presentation skills, or interpersonal communication. Those are kind of luxury items and not necessarily a necessity. So if there's a firm who's paying to have that kind of training for their employees, chances are, again, they're going to have funding available to pay for what you do. So I mentioned advertorial. Everyone's familiar with Circa magazine. I'm not sure if they're exclusively pay-for-play, but I know that a lot of their content, a lot of their articles come in from their advertisers. But there's a way of getting paid as a freelance writer. I call it coming in through the back door. Flip open one of those Circa magazines and you can write for them, but you're not writing with them as your client. Look at who's advertising with Circa. You've got doctors and dentists, and there's a dermatologist and an interior designer. They are getting content published in Circa. So, this whole presentation is about money-making opportunities outside of publishing. So you may be thinking, wait a minute, you're talking about writing for a magazine. Your customer is the advertiser. So you can write a story for that dermatologist that he or she will be submitting to Circa and getting published, and that person pays you. You never speak with the editor or the publisher, and you don't have to go through the magazine at all. This happens to be an article that I wrote for a dentist 3 or 4 years ago, and apparently they liked it so much that they resubmitted it for the October, November, December issue of Circa just this past year. And I interviewed Dr. Sa, I think is his name, on the phone. It was just a phone interview, a very simple piece on Halloween candy, a trick or a treat. And I really wrote most of it myself with a little bit of input from him. Worked with his office directly and got paid from them directly. So that's another way to work with ad. Don't look at Circa and just say, oh, I'll never get in there. there's a way to get in through the back door. Okay, so now that we've talked about some of these markets, let's talk about defining your products. So we'll look at products and services, because again, you're writing, you're creating content. If you look at what a business distributes, what they mail, what they have in the little stands when you first walk in the front door, this stuff is what was produced maybe 10 or 15 years ago by people whose title was writer. They were considered writers. We're not really called writers in this capacity as much as we are content creators or creatives. So just because you think of yourself as a writer, a freelance writer, that doesn't mean that's what people are looking for when they're contacting you or the way you're describing your products. And this is disappointing to a lot of people. I find especially established writers, writers who have published widely with magazines, newspapers, perhaps they've written several books, and they're obviously accomplished writers. But it's a new world, and we're now creating content, especially with digital marketing. There are a lot of businesses who operate exclusively online, so there are lots of opportunities to write or create content for those types of businesses. So now that it's called content marketing, this is a graph that comes from Indeed.com, and this is a snapshot graph that started in 2005, and this represents the number of job descriptions, or job titles, I should say, that contain the words either content marketing or content strategy. And this is the increase in those job titles in 10 years. It's astronomical. And I'd like to guess, I assume that especially in those early years, quite a few of those jobs would have at some point in the past just been called writer. So don't let the term content creator or content strategist frighten you or overwhelm you. If you're a good storyteller, if you can understand what a business is all about, and get sort of in the mind of the person you're writing for or ghostwriting for, you're still a writer, you're just called a content creator. So let's look at the specific products and drill down just a little bit. The way you're going to talk about when you meet or contact a potential client, you're going to talk in terms of, first of all, digital or print, or both. And you'll probably talk about external or internal customers, or both. I know this is a ton of information, but I'll just go through it quickly. So when you talk about external customers, you're looking at website content, blog posts, articles. And again, it's not that you're working with a publisher, but you're still writing articles, and sometimes they're published online. Newsletters, both internal and external. News releases, which used to be called press releases. Columns and op-eds. Marketing collateral, that photo of all the brochures and the branded calling business cards. Flyers, one-sheets, mailings, posters, all of those are in the marketing collateral category. And all of our favorites, social media. Social media, all the various channels and platforms There is work there, believe it or not. I have several writing colleagues whose sole job as freelancers even is to create content for social media for a particular company. They work usually on retainer, so this could be maybe a 6-month contract or even a month-by-month contract. And they manage the Facebook account. It's usually Facebook and Twitter. Those tend to be the most popular for corporate clients. And depending on the type of business, I would throw Instagram in there if it's a highly visual, like a designer or an architect. Instagram may be an additional platform that they pursue. So when you're working in social media, you'll create content sometimes a month at a time. It'll be pre-written and pre-scheduled, and you might pop in a current event once a week as part of your contract, just so the content is fresh. And I have one friend who has, she works with a large medical practice, and she has their Facebook and Twitter account. She's on retainer with them. She bills $600 a month just for that content. $600. You don't need too many of those to supplement your freelance writing income. So I want 10 jobs like that where I spend a little time on Facebook anyway, so might as well get paid for it. Yeah, so just a tool to pop in here if you do have the opportunity to work with social media. There are all kinds of neat tools that will help you manage that account. There's one called Buffer, where you program all of your content in, you schedule it to release at a particular time, and that way you're not on there every single day posting fresh material. And there's one called Hootsuite. I always have to stop and make sure I'm saying that correctly. Hootsuite, so it's an owl. Hootsuite is another app or tool that you can use. So those are external-facing products. How about internal? Think about when you walk into a business, all the places you're likely to find written content, written material. I mean, this, depending on the type of business it is, it seems a little dry, it might be a little boring, but a lot of businesses have to have an employee handbook, policies, procedures. If they're a manufacturing type of business, they'll have product specifications, instructions. They're going to have to include regulatory changes or things that their employees need to be aware of to cover, their legal obligations towards safety in the workplace. Reports. So many businesses it's routine. They produce quarterly reports. I've taught a couple of business classes at Coastal Federal Credit Union. Reports, that's a big part of what they do. And they usually do them internally, but some small businesses would much rather turn their raw material over to a freelancer to lay it out and do the graphics. And I've heard of some people that do that as freelancers. Forms, intake forms, evaluation forms, compliance forms, things that you find in HR. A lot of companies use templates, but if it's a very specific type of business and they want their own material included, there are opportunities there for freelancers to work with them. Combination of external and internal customers, depending on the type of business. Again, it's nice to have an entire company history somewhere in the database. Something that if you were to get called by the press because it's your 10th anniversary or your CEO just won an award and Rather than starting from scratch every time, it's good to have that in the database. So a company history, this is something PR firms do a lot for companies. Bio information, especially for the executives in the company. And it's nice to have a full bio and a short bio. And that's something that freelancers, after a while, it becomes very routine, but you can get really good at throwing together bios for people. Have you ever looked at a press release, like really looked at a news release closely? At the bottom, there's always a summary, a very general summary of the company. And those are called, they're called different things. I call them blurbs. And they do change. Sometimes the company will include, if they sell a lot of products, we did $5 million in business, or they'll receive an award for something. And so even though the blurb is a semi-permanent part of the company's digital assets, they do need updating occasionally, and a lot of times it's just easier for them to get a freelancer to do that. I've worked with, especially, it seems, doctors, dentists, and lawyers. I'm sure they're great at what they do, and they'll even say, hey, I'm a great doctor, I'm a terrible writer, or I just don't like to write, or I don't like to write about myself. And that's where a freelancer can come in and create their content for them. Last but not least, this is, so many people don't even think about this. If you're not in a particular field, award nominations are very straightforward work. If you're a freelancer, they're very easy, and they're everywhere. And if you're not in that field, you may not even realize that they're out there. So if you're at all interested in this, go home and look at the Triangle Business Journal. Look at their website. And if you look at the top, you'll see under lists and awards, I'm sure you've seen these, the top 10 whatever kind of business in the Triangle. In fact, I think that there may be some lists here. So those things don't just happen. A lot of times companies will submit themselves for a particular list, or they'll have someone else do that for them. And then if you look at the bottom, these are just some of the awards that are up every year that any business that fits the criteria can nominate for or submit for. So just this list, and this is a snapshot of the current list. These are constantly cycling. The Life Sciences Award, the CEO of the Year Awards, obviously that's once a year, but 40 under 40, I've missed the window on that one. Leaders in Diversity Awards. The reason I would encourage you all to look at this when you get home, or at some point, look at how easy these forms are. If your kid comes home from school and they got a C or a D on an assignment and you knew there was a rubric, that is always so upsetting. These things are created with very specific rubrics, and you have a field. It's not random at all. It's very specific. You enter the person's name. Say it's the CEO of the Year Award. You can look at nominations. There's an application. See at the top, where at the very bottom in the center it says nominate for an award. You can write that for someone just based off of their biographical information and maybe a quick interview. I've written these. If you follow what the criteria are, and they are very specific, it's so easy to write about someone and fill in the forms. what I would caution you about, you don't want to interview one of their coworkers and get responses like, "She's great to work with. She's the best boss I've ever had. She's wonderful." If you find yourself writing great, wonderful, great, wonderful over and over, chances are you aren't really creating a unique product for that nominee. So look for specific anecdotes or stories that reflect just how well they've done their job. I'm going to brag, and it's not, I don't usually brag, every award nomination that I've written, the person's gotten the award. I mean, that's cool, right? It's easy. It's a rubric. Follow the rubric. Okay, so those are some of the products that you can create. I want to go back real quickly. Looking again at the external customer-facing products, things like blog posts and columns and op-eds, those are the kinds of things that you get better at over time. And one thing I like to ask clients, don't just tell me about your business. Give me just a nugget of an opinion. Just an example. An attorney that specializes in, they're now called, I think, mediation. It's a type of separation and divorce procedure it's not contentious. There have been lots and lots of studies that families, children of divorce fare much better when there is a mediator involved. Imagine that. You mean cussing and fighting isn't the best way to go? Imagine that. But if that attorney has an opinion about a particular piece of legislation or why this method is better, find out what their opinion is, and then it's easy to argue. And then it's something that actually makes sense and is interesting to read. So that would be in a column or a blog post. You don't want to hear just generic information. I once ghost wrote for a human resources to employment attorney, and his idea, I mean, you would think that you have this reputation, right, as an attorney, that you're out for blood, but he worked with small businesses who had that had issues with their employees. A lot of times they were almost litigious, but he recommended that an employer intervene early in the process. If there was an employee who had a lot of issues with showing up for work, he recommended intervening early and working with the employee to make sure that there was a better outcome. And in that case, it was much, much better. And it was easy to write that piece because it made sense. Okay, in addition to products that you can create as a content creator or a content strategist, there are services that you can provide: copy editing, proofreading, teaching and coaching, workshops, speaking engagements. I'm going to go home with this paycheck that I got today, and who knows, I might retire early. No, but enough of those, and it helps supplement your income. It also helps tie the gap between published articles, right? Because you don't always get paid right away. Photography and videography and video script writing, those are all great opportunities to build upon your writing services. We're running short on time, so I'm just going to go through the next few pretty quickly. Create a process as a freelancer. Establish something that you can repeat with each client. It just makes it easier than reinventing the wheel every time. Have your initial meeting. leave that meeting with a set of expectations that are communicated between you. Respond as quickly as you can with the detail of what you're offering to provide, and then submit a proposal with your bid and your timeline and your parameters, and then you're on your way to a contract. If everyone can see at the bottom, I just added a few tips. There are some tips or some apps that are very helpful through this process. Have you ever tried to coordinate a meeting with 4 or 5 people and it's emailing back and forth and so stressful? There's an app called Doodle, and you enter a little calendar and you can match up, and people go in and they see what everybody else can make, and they add to it, and by the end of a single email, you know when you're meeting, or at least it's narrowed down, and it's none of this back and forth. What a time saver. Okay, so I'm going to need to wrap up, but this is what one of my proposals looked like. So I just went through and summarized what I could do for this client. I'd be happy to put this online and everybody could download it. Would that? Yeah. I'll be happy to do that. Setting rates. You can do this per word or per project. Clients really like to know, for their budgeting purposes, what's this going to cost me? They have no concept of a per word bid. So typically these are project-based, and it's all going to tie back to your hourly rate, right? So the more you do this, the more you know how much time you're going to be spending on a particular client or product. Try to be flexible. And to grow your business, anytime you can get additional training, and there's so much training available online, some of it's actually free, and you can get better at your trade. You can look for certification. I just got my Pointer Institute copy editing certificate, and that's very affordable as well, and you can specialize. You can be the go-to person for a particular field, gardening or nursing or mental wellness, nutrition. You can specialize in a certain area, and that way you become the source. Okay, really quickly, I would recommend, no matter what, that you get subscriptions to AP Style Book Online, or depending on what kind of writing you're doing, Chicago Manual of Style. If you're writing a lot of medical pieces, maybe the AMA. And this might seem crazy, but go to YouTube. If you don't know what a content strategist is, and you have access to YouTube, there's no excuse. So you get conversant, you learn the vernacular, you know what your clients need, what they're looking for. Just look at enough videos, and eventually, I wouldn't say it's rocket science or brain surgery, but you do get a feel for what this kind of work entails. Okay, I've run a little late.
We have time.
A few questions?
We have time for 1 or 2 questions,
Okay.
real quick.
Can you just talk a little bit about liability and what kind of insurance you have and how you cover yourself?
You know, that's a great question, and I haven't done anything official, like declare an LLC or anything like that. And it's funny because our insurance company is very interested by the fact that I'm a freelance writer. They want to make sure that we're not exposed. I think that the way I've handled it is I've always signed a contract that the client has requested. So, for example, a non-compete. I don't share information, with another client in a competing market. But as far as liability, I make sure that what I create is factually correct, and up to this point, I've had absolutely no issues. I deal with local people almost exclusively and small businesses, and it's about the relationship, but that's no excuse. I would definitely, if you're just starting out, I would definitely have a conversation with an attorney and see if there's any particular type of business formation that you might need to pursue. So this is one of those don't do as I do type things.
We have time for one more quick one.
So you noted or suggested going online and looking for companies basically that have invested in a PR firm and things like that as qualifiable candidates for possible client. If they're utilizing a PR firm, wouldn't they already have somebody from that PR firm that's writing the content for them?
One of the things that that you would look for is, and that's a great question, if you go onto a PR firm's website, and there are a lot in the area, some great ones and some not so great ones, they're listing the clients that they've worked with, typically in the past. And that client may have done media training with them and taught them how to respond to media questions. They may have done video recording and production for them. They may not have created the kind of content that you're trained to do or that you're interested in offering. So it's kind of an umbrella set of services. You may be able to find, I definitely wouldn't recommend poaching from a contracted situation, but you may be able to offer them something that they're not getting currently from their PR firm. Jenny?
So when you were saying that every person that you nominated received the award, is that a potential moneymaker in some way? Or what is the connection with that?
How do I get paid?
Well, no, I was saying everybody who you nominated, you looked at the rubric, and every person that you nominated got the award. So how does that lead to money?
So the company that is offering the nominee and needs the material written contracts with me, and I go about the process. I interview, and it doesn't have my name on it. In fact, when I create the content, I don't usually go in and actually fill out the fields. I look at what the fields are, and they have word counts, like 250 words, and there are maybe 6 really large blocks of information. So you're getting all kinds of biographical data and background and sometimes volunteer activities that the person has done. But they're paying me for that, and it's usually a project base, not a word count. So that's where the money comes from. And then they get to have the CEO of the year, which is, for their promotional purposes, is great. Great publicity.
Folks, we got to bring this to a draw, unfortunately. It's almost time for the next session. Please give it up for Jenni Hart.
Thank you.